Bonjour, comment ça va? Bien. Good morning. One correction to Andrew said is that I actually don't work for anyone. So I'm at liberty to say whatever I want to say. I chair the board of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. But alongside that, I give my time to important causes. So I'm back to being an activist and a volunteer. And so I am very keen to support what you stand for. And I hope that you have decided amongst yourselves that you are a force of change in the world. And I hope that you are ready to be that change. And what that demands of you is a sense of courage and fearlessness. The same sort of fearlessness that we had when I was your age, and I stood up and I listened to someone who was a radical, charismatic, militant leader of the students, someone called Steve Biko. I was 15 years when I went to listen to him in a crowded church hall. It was a time of apartheid, a time in which our human dignity had been stolen, in which our very existence was that of being a non-person. And I stood there and I listened to him on the stage with all the security policemen that were trying to terrify us. And his words echo in my ears like it was yesterday. And he said, "You have nothing to lose but your chains. Because you can choose to live a life of slavehood and accept the injustice of apartheid, or you can stand up today and fight for your human dignity. You may die in fighting for that, but you would have died an honorable death." And what it did is that it clicked something in my head and was able to marshal and channel my anger into the fight for social justice, and a fight that became a global fight supported by many of you, particularly your parents, who had made very simple choices in how they would support us, how they could help us in solidarity by their actions to make us or enable us to win our freedom. And so that's what I want to see today from you. Because today, my generation has brought you to the edge of a precipice of dashed expectations. Look at around us. Look even in Europe today. An economic crisis, a financial crisis that has brought the world to its knees with real consequences for real people. Look at the tens of millions of workers that have lost their jobs, that have lost their pensions, that have lost their homes. Look at the trillions of dollars that we have put into rescuing the financial services, and think of what we could have done with that money to make this world a better place. Have we had one apology? Had we had one head of a bank going to jail? No. We pretend that the problem is over, but the problem remains with us. I chair a global foundation that was launched in 2002 at the UN Summit on Children. The intention then, driven by a vision of Kofi Annan when he was Secretary General, and Bill Gates from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to tackle through a public-private partnership an enormous cancer in our world, malnutrition, that faces 2 billion people. We know today that 1 billion people will go to bed without food. They will not be able to put food on their table for their children. When we are talking about human dignity, the foundation of human dignity is the ability to feed your children. President Lula was someone I worked with closely. When he became president of Brazil, he said to his ministers and to his parliament, the purpose of government, of all the laws, of all the regulations, of all the policies, of all the money we have, is to enable every parent to put food on the table 3 times a day for their children. And the reason he did that, because of his integrity. But if you go back into his personal history, you will see that when he was young, he lived in a poverty-stricken household. In fact, the first time he even tasted bread was at 8 years old. That is what we need today in the world. People of credibility, of moral leadership. Now, I have had the unique opportunity in my life, the privilege of meeting some extraordinary people. 2 days ago, I was in Prague, speaking at a conference with the Dalai Lama. Now, you all know who the Dalai Lama is, I hope. Do you? And there's something about a person like him, like a Mandela. There's a natural exuberance. There's an enthusiasm. There's an overflowing of positive energy that makes us want to be better people. And it's very extraordinary. And I want to relate a few things that he said there, because I think it is instructive for you, as the next generation in particular. And the things that he said was, we need, your generation, to make the 21st century a century of peace. We need you as your generation to give hope to the millions of young people that today feel excluded from democracy, that face lives of unemployment. And what he said is that I, and he's talking about himself, am but one of 7 billion people in the world. There's nothing special about me, because mentally, emotionally, physically, we are all the same. Now, that statement of moral leadership coming from someone like him demonstrates one thing, what we committed to in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that we are all born in freedom and with human dignity. Therefore, we need to care what happens to any member of the human race. And so, if I look at the challenge of malnutrition today in the world, in the time that I will spend with you, an hour, 300 young children will die. They will die of preventable causes that are simple to implement, solutions that are there, the science that is there, the money that is there. What is missing is the political will to do the right thing. And so what we need from you as this generation is to build the tsunami of hope, of accountability, that makes our leaders understand that when you are elected to government, whether you are a leader of an NGO, whether you are a CEO of a business, your job is to be accountable and serve the interests of the society and not the interests of yourself. So one of the things that the Dalai Lama encourages us to do, and he said it there, stop praying so much on your knees and stand up and do something. And that's a message I want to leave you with. Because if I go back to my own time with a Mandela, I spent much of my life fighting for his freedom, and then spent an entire decade walking alongside of him from his day of release to the day that he left politics. And the one thing that always inspired me about him was that he said that fighting poverty, and that included ignorance or inequality or oppression or discrimination, was not an act of charity. It was an act of justice. So at the core of the society that we want, at the core of the world we want, sits the notion of justice and fairness. And I think that's the compassion we need to bring back into our society. And I ask you today, as the apostles of the technology revolution, I ask you today, how do we bring those values, that morality, that compassion into the cold steel of technology? Because if I ask you in each one of the things, technological tools that you are holding in your hands today, sits a very important element. It's called coltan. Now you know where coltan comes. It comes from places like the DRC. We know it's a vital part of the technology. But do we know the blood that sits on our hands? Because many of those resource wars that source these precious metals are done through child labor, are done through the murder and rape of innocent women in the eastern part of Congo. Are we prepared to stand up here today and challenge those companies to say, the technology you are providing to us has caused the needless deaths of young children and women, and we are going to do something about it? So, the one lesson I've learned in life, live a life of truth. And when you declare that I'm living a life of truth, because this is what you claim to be representing, the truth, the undiluted truth, then you will stand up and challenge injustice wherever it stands, even far out of sight of the technology that you have. And so, the technology today, we know, has resulted in the death of geography. But it has not resulted in the death of injustice, of the abuse of human rights, the corruption that we see in our society. When I was Minister of Telecommunications in Mandela's cabinet, I remember us meeting as ministers in sub-Saharan Africa. And the one conclusion we came to is that our continent has less phones than the city of New York or the city of Tokyo. And if we wanted to solve these issues, we had to work together as ministers of telecommunications to create the right policies, the right regulations, the right competitive environment, because we knew our governments had no money. When we went into government in 1994, when Mandela, we inherited a bankrupt state. We knew that we had no money. There were many competing needs ahead of us, for houses, for water, for sanitation, for electricity, for education. So I was at the back of the queue. And so we thought, what would be the right environment to be able to attract investment, but also meet the challenges of delivering universal services? And I come from the age of being a dinosaur. I mean, when I grew up, we didn't have a telephone in our house. And when we did get a telephone, it was locked. I went through the age of telex machines, through to beepers. And today, Africa is the fastest growing market in the world with over 700 million phones. This pervasive technological platform has created a revolution that you know, where today people cannot be controlled, information cannot be controlled. And I have been in places like Nairobi and Dakar and Johannesburg, meeting with young people like you, who are changing the way we think about things, who are driving new entrepreneurial opportunities. And that dream that technology will change the way we think, the way we organize our lives, the way we work, the way we play, the way we deliver services like education or health, is a reality. And so, how do we make this work in a way that makes our democracies work? Because I think we have to redefine growth in the world. I think it is a myth, the old growth trajectory of the past, that someone will provide you a job and there will be some big institution. Today, we have to think creatively as our population grows from 7 to 9 billion people, of how do we create livelihoods? How do we deliver services? And one thing I can assure you, where South Africa was ahead of the curve 20 years ago, today we fall far behind where places like Kenya are. And that's because of policy and regulation. That's because our governments have failed us. And so I look at Africa, and I see there's 1 billion people there. As Andrew said, I sit on the board of the Moe Bryan Foundation, which focuses on governance. Of the 1 billion people, half of them are under 19. You want to know what the average age of our head of state is? 62. I mean, right next door to South Africa, we have someone starting their 7th term at 89. What can you expect from a leadership that is so disconnected from the reality of where the world is and where the 21st century is? And so I think what you need to bring back into this technology is ethics. It's accountability. I'm coming from South Africa from a province of Eastern Cape, the poorest province of South Africa. We have seen 800 million rand stolen in an 18-month period by officials of the state. Babies have died because we have no incubators. We don't have a cold chain. We are in dire shortages of nurses and doctors because money is stolen. That's not the money that belongs to these predatory elites. That's money that belongs to our people. How can we use this information technology to track expenditure and expose those predatory elites that kill our people by their actions of theft? That's what I need you to do. And so I would like to see a future like in Africa, the richest continent in the world, but where the poor people who walk on the gold and the diamonds and the coltan are the poorest in the world because we have the poorest leadership. I want to see the issue of governance brought down through this information, open data platforms to create the type of tools and information in the hands of ordinary people that hold their leaders to account. And that is the new revolution that we need to talk about. The revolution that will bring a sense of justice back into the world. And so, we are a planet at risk. The ecological crisis that you're all aware of. The scientists predict a 4-degree rise in temperature this century if we do not change how we grow, if we do not change how we consume resources of our planet. How do we make sure that narrative, that implication for billions of our people today who are already suffering in the Horn of Africa, or in West Africa, or in the low-lying deltas of Bangladesh, or the Mekong Delta? How do we make sure that we understand that our human activity is causing such harm? And I'm hoping that you will be the activists, the leaders that will make this part of the language that we want to see in the world, that will defeat this language of denialism that so dominates the global architecture of our world, whether it's in our governments, whether it's in the UN system, whether it's in the private sector. I would like to see that you become the advocates of the compassion, the care, that we need to build the type of world and societies where we do care. We need to build the type of world and planet where we care about what happens to this planet. Because what's at risk is not the planet. What's at risk is the survival of the human species. And it is your duty and your responsibility today to take up that new narrative that we want to make the part of the social and economic fabric of the world. So thank you very much, and I look forward to our conversation. Okay, thanks.
Jay, that was fantastic, and I know it's been exceptionally well received, not only in the hall, but people watching around the world. I think the first question from me is, how can we make technology a force for good and not a force for harm? What are the pressures, the policies that will make that do it, and who's going to make it happen that way?
Well, the one thing that I do and recite is on the United Nations Broadband Commission. And I think, up to now, I have not heard the voice of young people. I've heard people of my generation talking about what young people need. But if you look at technology, if you look at the new applications in the places where I've gone, in these hubs of technology in Africa, I don't find old people there. I find young people there. So what we need from you is to know what you are thinking. What are you thinking about the internet governance debate? What are you thinking about the type of innovation that not just drives gadgets that the rich and powerful want to use to play with and will queue up outside to get the latest gadget, but innovation that drives our delivery of a better society, of a more humane society, of one that cares? I think you need to stand up and make your voice heard. And people like me or Andrew are here to support you. I cannot tell you what to do. I will never have the knowledge you have. But tell me what you want to do. And like someone like a Mandela or Steve Biko stood up and said, this is what we should be doing, I will do the same for you. So I am really looking to answer that question. I want people, like in this audience, to tell us what leaders like me should be doing when we go to platforms, we stand on platforms like this, and we are speaking about the internet.
And how do you pick that up? How do you use technology? How do the information systems pick that up for you? How do you get those feeds?
I was thinking today, one of our challenges in South Africa, we were a political miracle of the 20th century. Undoubtedly, if you look at what's happening in Syria, you look at the bombs, governments bombing their citizens, using sarin gas against their own citizens. And I think back to our political miracle. We delivered a political miracle. We delivered a democracy that worked. We stepped back because of extraordinary leadership from the precipice of a racial civil war. But we have our challenges today. Like about what I talk in the Eastern Cape. I look at the education budget in South Africa. It is probably $25 billion, more than the budgets of any country in the rest of Africa. But our outcomes are worse than many countries in Africa. Now, if you look at someone, you talk to them, $23 billion, they don't understand it. How do you come to terms with this? And I've been saying to technologists, we had hackathons, and I think Justin is here, and we had one where he organized all your young people. And I said, please, can you take this big budget and make it understandable for someone sitting in a rural school? And tell me what the budget for the school is. How much of money is allocated for teachers? If it's for 20 teachers, but there's only 15 teachers there, we know some money is missing. If you're supposed to buy 100 desks, but only 50 are bought, we know that money is missing. And then we as parents as students, as teachers, we can now mobilize that local community to have the information and the tools to hold that district commissioner accountable and go and bang on their doors. And that's what I'm looking for. It's revolutionary what this technology can do.
So what's going to persuade governments to start releasing that information?
Do we need governments? It's like we have the second most transparent budget in the world, in South Africa. Am I going to depend on government? No. I think that information is available or can be collected because there's a budgetary process in most countries. What we're working on now, and it's taking us almost 6 to 8 months now already to work, is drill through that information and make it understandable. That's hard work. But that is such a fantastic, exciting opportunity. I mean, this is like you're creating a revolution. And, to be honest with you, it's not like going out and fighting hand-to-hand with the police force and getting baton charged, like we were nowadays. You can do it sitting wherever you are, anywhere in the world. We can make this information available to you. Give us those tools that we can go back to communities, fuse this online presence that you have and this global intellectual capital with local struggles fought by local people who are going door to door building organization. That's what we need to do. We need to fuse online and offline organizing. Because information is very powerful, but you know how many digital petitions you click in a day. It doesn't really help us. But when you give us information, give us tools that people can go back and organize, that's when there's magic of accountability.
So what would the post-2015 development goals called for a data revolution?
Yes.
So what would your manifesto be for that data revolution? What should each community have a right to in terms of information that it should be able to access?
We had a slogan, one person, one vote. I tried to think of what the slogan would be amongst you all, but I think...
One person, 1 gigabyte.
One person, 1 gigabyte. But information is power. When people are informed and they know their rights, they know their entitlements, they know what the Constitution undertakes to do, they become unstoppable. And that's what we need. We need you to be unstoppable in exposing corruption, in resisting the oppression of our governments, who are trying to clamp down on the internet, who are trying to clamp down on the media. But it's impossible, because every single one of us is a journalist. Every single one of us is a whistleblower. And what those in authority must realize, that we have liberated ourselves from the chains of secrecy. And we must never go back there. And I think that's what I want you to do. I want you to fight this battle of liberation, of information, in a way that enables ordinary citizens to say, man, where is the money that's supposed to be buying these desks, or putting toilets in our schools, or making sure there's electricity or a library? I think that's what we want to do. If you look at the South African experience we went through, it was not fought by leaders. We had extraordinary leaders, but if we didn't have people organized in the trenches that were prepared to stand up like a phalanx of freedom fighters and hold those in power to account, we would still be living under apartheid. And this is what I'm saying. We do not need a world that is veiled in secrecy. We do not need a world where information is denied of what our rights are. We need a citizenry that is informed and a citizenry that is active in making sure those in power are accountable and understanding that they have a mandate to serve us, not for us to serve them.
Okay, thank you. And thinking particularly about the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, what's the role of information in improving nutrition?
Well, if you really take the issue of malnutrition, which is a devastating indictment on all of us. You know, take the information that we should have available. If you look at the window of nutrition, it's from the time a woman falls pregnant, in the first 1,000 days till 2 years, the child is 2 years. Just take what should be done in this vital period from an information standpoint. One is that we need a woman when she's pregnant to have access to antenatal clinics so that she can get the right minerals and vitamins and food that is necessary for her child to grow normally through this period of pregnancy. We need that child to be born in a place of safety, in a birthing center, which is either a clinic or a hospital. We need that child in the first 6 months to have exclusive breastfeeding. That's the knowledge of breastfeeding. It's the best thing you can give your child, but it has the worst advertising. And we need from 6 to 24 months as the kids go into mixed feeding to understand that value chain. Now, why is it that the majority of women do not breastfeed? Knowledge, advertising by companies for breast milk substitutes. Why is it that the women who are pregnant don't have access to these micronutrients that are so vital? And they cost so little. In Bangladesh, we've been working with BRAC, a big social organization, and Renata, a company. We were able, through our intervention, to produce the sprinkle for less than $1 a month. For less than $1 a month, we are able to stop most of those children becoming stunted. Now, what is stunting? There are 200 million children that are stunted in the world. It's irreversible. It's mental and physical challenges that child will face. It's irreversible. Now, how do we make sure that our governments are accountable to that? How do we make sure that citizens are informed about that? How do we make sure that the companies are doing the right thing? Because when you are poor and you're earning less than $2 a day, the only food you can buy is junk food. How do we make these companies accountable so we don't have junk food in our marketplace? And that people have a right to decent, nutritious, affordable, and accessible food. Technology is fundamental in fighting those battles.
Okay, thank you. And just so from one final question for you to really challenge the audience. What's the one thing that you'd like people in the audience here to do in the next week?
Use the tools that you have. Start a revolution of ethics on the net, holding people to account, whether they're in NGOs, whether they are in government, or whether they are in business, or whether they're in the media. I think that the most important thing we need is to bring ethics and a sense of morality back into the world. Otherwise, we are going to face a hopeless future of unmet expectations of the next generation. That's what I expect from you.
Jay, that's fantastic. Thanks very much indeed. Really fantastic. Thank you.